Nancy, the foreign policy story that actually was dominating the week and that did dominate the week was Gaza.
That's right.
And Donald Trump has not been especially loquacious talking about the consequences of the war for civilians, but he had this to say.
That's real starvation stuff. I see it. And you can't fake that. So we're going to be even more involved.
So help us rewind. Why did Trump feel compelled to weigh in that way?
So on Sunday, Netanyahu said that there wasn't starvation happening amid sort of evidence to the contrary. We started to see more photos coming out of people starving. The United Nations agency responsible said 1 in 3 Gazans are not getting meals for multiple days in a row. And so we started to hear from aid agencies, even inside Israel, and organizations sort of assessing that, that there was an increased starvation risk in Gaza. And this comes, remember, after there was a blockade essentially, and that nothing could get in for 2.5 months. And then in May, things started to trickle in. So just we knew things weren't getting in. And so the totality of that, I think, compelled the president to say something. And I think arguably he was moved by the photos that he did see. And so this all comes as we're seeing increased pressure from the international community as well. He was in Europe when he said that, and in the days that followed, we heard from France, from Canada, and the UK, that they wanted, there was a sense of urgency to the humanitarian crisis there.
We'll get back to the way that those European states are pressuring Israel. But Alex, my colleagues at The Atlantic, Jonathan Lemire and Isaac Stanley Becker, published a piece that I want to quote from. They wrote, "Trump has come to believe what many in Washington have thought for months, that Netanyahu is looking to prolong the conflict in Gaza in open defiance of Trump's wishes for the war to end, and that Netanyahu has continued Israel's assault, which has claimed tens of thousands of civilian lives to maintain his own political power. The White House also believes that Netanyahu is taking steps that interfere with the potential ceasefire deal." I want you to interpret some of the psychodrama here, and I want to know if your reporting tracks with what they had. But does this mean that Trump's going to begin to push Netanyahu harder for an end to the war, or to actually increase the level of civilian aid coming into Gaza?
So a couple of things we need to unpack here. The first one is, it is astounding that the president is getting major foreign policy decision-making ideas from television, not from his own intelligence community. Let's just start there. Second, when it comes to Bibi, Trump believes that he has the ability and the leverage over Netanyahu. When you talk to White House officials, what they say is that, well, what happens is Netanyahu basically steps over a line that Trump doesn't like, Trump calls him, and then he steps back. And then you ask officials, well, how do you stop Netanyahu from crossing the line in the first place? And in this case, you know, blocking aid, from life-saving aid from getting to people in Gaza, they'll go, what are you talking about? Like, Trump just calls him and then he does it. We haven't seen that. The reason there isn't as much leverage as the Trump team believes there is because Netanyahu has his own politics too. And his politics are where he has his own trial and corruption issues, where staying in power keeps him out of that. But the right flank of his governing coalition is what keeps him in that seat and possibly out of the courtroom or larger courtroom setting. And they don't want to see Israel participate in any sort of plan that helps the people of Gaza. In fact, they'd rather the Palestinians in Gaza leave the territory and perhaps even settle it, send Israeli settlers there. So when you're Netanyahu and you are between Trump, who is urging more aid now and urging for an end of the war, but not really pushing that hard, and Trump doesn't have that much leverage, and you're worried about your own personal stake, professional stake, and your governing coalition, you're not likely to move. So Netanyahu's kind of operating in this little space where he's giving some, he's getting some, but he's not doing that much.
Yeah.
And what has changed a little bit is that as of last week, the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, is on a summer break. And so he can't be taken down by the 2 ministers in that coalition right now, the right-wing coalition, and his government collapse for the next month or so, or 6 weeks. So this is a little bit of a window. Steve Witkoff, the U.S. envoy, is there and actually went to Gaza today. My caution is that Witkoff went to see a site of the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is a joint U.S.-Israeli operation that has been almost universally criticized by the aid communities because it set up just this trickle of aid you're talking about, was 4 sites in southern Gaza, in Rafah, where the people from the north would have to come to those sites to get those 4 locations, guarded by the IDF, which is in violation of established international law for the way aid is supposed to be distributed. And the occupiers, which in this case is Israel, in Gaza, have an obligation, a legal obligation and a moral obligation, but a legal obligation to feed the people there. And it's not only food, it's fuel for the hospitals, which now have not enough fuel for the NICU unit. In the incubators, children, infants, newborns are being stacked. They've, in some instances, in a nurse I interviewed, an American nurse doing 3 weeks there, she said, we're doing operations without full anesthesia. It is appalling. And we're also, interrupting dialysis because we don't have the fuel. This is in the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis, near Khan Yunis. So the issue is, this is not just a trickle, and that is why the international community, 108 agencies, 28 countries have condemned this process for not using the UN World Food Program that distributed to 400 places. Now, the counter-argument is that Hamas is attacking and stealing the food. That has been the U.S. and the Israeli argument. But some officials within Israel in this past week from agencies said that's not the case.
That's what they told the New York Times.
Exactly.
Have you heard any competing evidence that it's actually true?
I think it's probably partially true, but it's also that people are desperate, and they themselves are, jumping when there's food. I mean, they have to walk so many miles to get to it. But just very briefly, not only are they starving, but they are then coming into the hospitals with the kind of wounds, artillery and other kinds of shrapnel wounds that indicate that they've been shot.
Right.
But the Steve Witkoff trip today, though, is going to be really, really important based on what he says for U.S. foreign policy coming back and how Congress responds to this. So many Republicans in Congress have been saying they are interested to see what Steve Witkoff says based on his tour of these feeding centers, these humanitarian centers in Gaza. And it's, as you laid out, Andrea, is not likely to be the full picture. And so it could be a very skewed response.
Are they waiting for that because they would want more political space to criticize Israel? And if he's critical, that's where they are instinctually want to go?
No, I think that the chances that the Republican Party becomes critical of Israel are very, very slim, outside of a few outliers like Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene and some on the MAGA influencers like Steve Bannon or Tucker Carlson. But I think that they are looking for justification to continue the current policies of holding hands very closely with Israel, rather than having to have to make it, in order for it to be less difficult for them to separate themselves.
This Witkoff trip, to me, it's all brave and good that he went there. Mm-hmm. That said, they know what the answer to this is, right? The GHF plan did not work. Israel stopped aid from going in for a long time. The Trump administration did not act when that happened.
Right.
And so they know what the answer is. The fact that Witkoff and Huckabee are going in, and then they're going to brief Trump, and they're going to come up with some master plan, all of a sudden, in one day, when they haven't been coordinating. There are people at the state that don't know anything about this.
Can I get you just to, so why, so the Gaza Humanitarian Fund was something that was concocted by management consultants, private security contractors. It was the favored solution of Israel and the favored solution of the Trump administration. As you point out, it's failed in many ways. But why is the Trump administration so unwilling to abandon it?
I truly believe they just weren't paying that much attention to it. I mean, Israel said this was the right way forward. Plus, as Andrew noted, Hamas is stealing this stuff. So we need to Israel need to protect this aid so it can get to the right people, so Hamas can't take it. We're fighting a war against Hamas after all. And the Trump administration went, okay, fine. Now, there are obvious issues with the UN-led system, which would still deliver aid and trucks and into multiple areas.
So, but just to be clear,
please.
I mean, these shouldn't be mutually exclusive, the Gaza Humanitarian Fund and the UN system, but the UN system has certain virtues, Nancy, that the Gaza Humanitarian Fund doesn't have.
Well, and the UN has said that it doesn't want to operate under that system. And so you have trucks that are mounted nearby but aren't able to get in. So there's this conflict. Either it's restrictions being put in by Israel, it's just the chaos that what happens when those trucks come in and people are swarming them. And the UN has said that it doesn't want to work within the system. It sees real problems with it. To your question about why the Trump administration is tied to it, you know, in some ways they were affiliated with it before the details were actually worked out. And so this is an American proposal as much as it is a business one and one that's backed by the Israelis. The one other thing I want to point out as we talk about aid is one of the solutions you've been hearing this week is using airdrops, and we saw some this week. You need more than 100, maybe 200 flights to replicate, in a day, by the way, to replicate what trucks could bring in if they were at the normal clip that Gaza needs, which is 500 trucks a day.
Some of those drops went into evacuation zones where people couldn't get to the food. Some of the drops can hit people. Parachute drops are just a terrible solution when trucks are right there. And there were 400 trucks a day at one point.
Well, let me ask you this question, because it feels like the solution to Gaza is obvious. When you have people who are starving, the obvious answer is food. And it seems like there's aid that could roll in, that there's a way to do this. What is the impediment? Why is this not happening?
It's, first of all, antipathy to the United Nations by Israel. Remember their response to UNRWA and to the other programs. But the World Food Program, run by Cindy McCain, has been validated by Lindsey Graham and others, and has operated really admirably and knows how to do this in conflict zones. The World Health Organization, which the U.S. under Donald Trump got out of in the first term, has been operating in and out of Gaza, bringing out the injured and doing it successfully. There are ways. The UN knows what it is doing in its hostile environment, clearly. Hamas is a problem. I'm going to be the last person to defend Hamas, which started the war, could end the war. But one thing that is happening in the last 48 hours, 24 hours perhaps, is that Witkoff and his negotiators are beginning to reach a position different from the original position, which is don't do a 40-day ceasefire, don't do a 60-day ceasefire. Go to an all or nothing. Get all the hostages out, the surviving 20 or however many, and the remains of the 2 American families who were desperate for their young men to come home for proper burial, and end the war. Hamas has to, put down their weapons, agree to a ceasefire, and return the hostages, and some sort of initial occupying force. Eventually, they hope, an Arab Gulf. Well, you were on some of those trips that I was on.
And Alex, that plan, is that the bones of an ultimate solution? And does it feels pretty distant right now? Is there any prayer for it?
I mean, even going back to Witkoff's trip today, I want to be clear, this is a scramble. They're scrambling to figure out what to do. They have some ideas where they could, go back to a UN plan, or they could, they have outlines, concepts of the plan, I believe someone once said, in terms of what to do in a day after in Gaza, but they are scrambling to figure it out. There's no coordination, there's no high-level real engagement or understanding of what they want to do. They are having conversations, they are working on it, but it is not in some sort of meaningful strategic way, as far as I understand it, talking to folks. I mean, there are people at the State Department with equities to do this stuff that don't know anything about the contours of what's to come. So, in terms of the day after plan, in general, the idea is Hamas lays down its arms, they leave, the Palestinian Authority takes political control of the area again, and some Arab or Gulf-led force with maybe some U.S. involvement from afar and some command post or advisory post helps. But we are a long, long, long way away from that, and it should be noted the Biden team had a day after plan. The Trump team rejected that. They wanted to come up with their own, but so far, the ideas that I've just discussed were still part of that original Biden plan.
Nancy, so let's just pull it all together. So there is no aid going in immediately in a significantly improved fashion. There is no ceasefire plan that's imminent. Talk about what's about to unfold.
So there are about 70 trucks going in. As Andrew mentioned, they need 400 to 500 a day to sort of to operate normally. And that was before the sort of slowdown. So right now you actually need more than that because they need medical supplies, they need water, they need cooking fuel, all these things that haven't gone in for a matter of months. You have a ceasefire that right now is essentially stalled, and you have European nations trying to sort of create a sense of urgency around a solution by putting forth this idea of recognizing a two-state solution at a time when it couldn't seem more farther away, right? We have, not just because of what's happening in Gaza, but we have West Bank settlements and an environment in Israel that is not interested in reaching that kind of solution when we can't even deal with day-to-day operations. So I think what you're going to see, at least in the short term, is increased pressure to ramp up the aid going in, because arguably we've already reached the tipping point.
Pressure from?
I think the international community, because I think the images that you're seeing, there's no sign of them stopping. When you have this level of starvation that we know about, there is a tipping point that makes it much, much harder to stop. And even if we fixed everything today, there's permanent impacts on the populations there. And so I think when we think about the ways ahead, it's really getting at this very urgent short-term problem of getting some sort of sustained aid in to the Palestinian people.
And just briefly, there was criticism of Hamas now from the Arab world, a joint statement, and there is a total failure by the Palestinian Authority to reform itself, which Secretary Blinken experienced, which now they are experiencing, in the current leadership.
And a failure of the United States and the Arab states to impose reform on the Palestinian Authority, which they could do.
It's really hard for them to have that kind of leverage, but they really need to. And Mahmoud Abbas is an outdated, corrupt leader, and is not a viable leader to rule even temporarily over Gaza. And there are very credible Palestinians of a different generation raising their hands and ready to take over, but nobody is forcing.
Leanne, I want to come back to the politics of this all, and you talked about Republicans, and let's talk about Democrats, because there was a vote this week about that Bernie Sanders sponsored that would have stopped arms going to Israel, and there were a lot of divisions within the Democratic caucus over that. Is Israel about to become a partisan issue, or has it already become a partisan issue in this country?
Well, the politics for Democrats is very complicated, so you can't say it's an evenly divided partisan issue at all. All Republicans voted against that Sanders resolution to withhold arms sales to Israel, but more Democrats voted for it this time than they have before. This is the third time this has been voted on. More than half of the Democratic caucus voted for it, and so there is a lot of movement in the Democratic Party on this issue that has really challenged the party, the party wants to stand with Israel. This is a party that before Republicans stood more closely with Israel, is also very sympathetic to the Palestinians, and especially with this crisis happening now. And so the fact that the starvation crisis in Gaza is a continuation of moving the Democratic Party to be more critical of Israel, but this is also what they think is Israel's handling of this war that they say has gone on too long and is done too cruelly, and there needs to be changes.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there for now. Thank you to our guests for joining me, and thank you at home for watching us.